Today we are with Miss Eileen. So Miss Eileen, please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. Thank you to Aina for inviting me to this interview session or podcast team interview. So my full name is Nur Azili Azim Binti Azizan, but I would prefer most of my students, they call me Miss Eileen, as I feel that is much approachable. Okay, so that is my brief introduction.
Okay. So Miss Eileen, right now we know you are actually a lecturer, but what is your experience become a lecturer in UiTM Rembau?
Okay, so actually my teaching journey does not start here in UiTM Rembau. It started long before I actually became a lecturer. Because during my degree years, I joined a university initiative where I involved in tutoring program under the Academy Pengajian Bahasa under UiTM. So I started by teaching high school students, mainly for public speaking activity. So I taught secondary schools in Selangor. And looking back, I don't think I realized at the time that I wanted to be an educator. So started from that journey. I joined quite a few community project, and there is one project called Project IQ, where we taught the underprivileged students. Okay, so that Project IQ organized by Malaysian Relief Agency, if you're familiar with that, MRA. So starting from that Project IQ, I realized that I wanted to be an educator. So if you ask me, my official career as a lecturer, I would say started from UiTM Shah Alam, started 2 years ago before I got transferred here in UiTM Rembau. Yeah.
So it's a very long journey before Miss Eileen become an educator and become a lecturer in UiTM Rembau. So our topic today will be conflict and ease management. So in your perspective, Miss Eileen, how you define conflict, and does conflict is a bad way or a good way in your opinion?
Okay, so basically, in my opinion and based on my experience, I feel like conflict simply means situation where people have different opinions. So when we have, we all have a different upbringing, so we must have different experience, and by that we have different opinions in perceiving things. Okay, so when we have different opinions, and automatically we see world with different angles and different perspectives. So in a university setting, I would say that conflict always happen between students, especially, and even between the lecturers as well.
Okay, so the next question is, we often see students having disagreement, especially during group project or assignment. In your experience as a lecturer, what is the most common cause of conflicts happen among students?
Okay, so from my experience, the most common conflict among students usually happens during group assignments. So it's the root of the conflict is simply just a little misunderstanding, and most of the time it's the style of communication, because everybody has their own style, their speaking style, I mean. So some people might have an outspoken manner when they talk, and some people might tend to reserve their comments when they feel that discomfortness in the situation. I teach English for communicative competence, so I always remind my students communication is the key. Students, maybe because they are teenagers, okay, they are at the age of trying to voice out their opinion, but they just do not know how. Yeah, so I think basically that's the main cause of the conflict that happened.
So the conflicts that happen mostly is about individually, the
Yeah.
individual itself, because sometimes they don't know how to express it, or sometimes they over express it to certain people, and then they make it like a bit harder to have the agreement between themselves.
They make it sound aggressive than they intended it to be. Yeah.
Sometimes they're just not intended to be that aggressive, but sometimes they just spoke it already. Can I understand?
So I tend to do that because I believe there must be something that they are frustrated about. So as I mentioned earlier in the previous question, okay, one of the strategies of communication skill is to actively listening to what other people have to say. So one thing about communication, we always think that communication is speaking, but actually most of the part in communication is actually listening. So we have to actually listen first, listen to understand, not listen to reply. Because when we listen to understand, we can actually choose our words well. We can actually collect all of our rational thoughts to be able to reply properly and appropriately to the people involved. So the first thing I would do is to stay calm. Secondly, I would stop the discussion. And thirdly, the most important part is to listen to what my students have to say. Yeah, I think that is the most important part.
Okay, so listen first before you giving a comment about something, because people always think like communication is the key, but the key to communication is by listening to people. So sometimes people are misunderstanding about the code. Communication is the key, but sometimes it's also involved listening.
Yes.
Okay, for the next question, have you ever had to act as a mediator, meaning you become the natural third party to help two students or maybe two groups solve a serious misunderstanding, and how did you handle it?
Okay, so yes, the answer is yes. There have been a few occasions where I had to step in as the mediator between two parties, especially during group assignments. Okay, but for my subject, I don't really have the assignments where my students need to work together. But most of the activities that I conduct in my classroom require group and teamwork, require group work and teamwork. So it started with a simple mocking and simple debate about the game, but it started to become more intense and become more a heated argument. So instead of asking them to defend themselves or try to make them to feel like they're supposed to win that game and whatnot, I calmly tell them the purpose of the activity. So I actually call them out, two of them, come to the front to talk to me personally, and I allow themselves to again express themselves why they are being so aggressive and what makes them frustrated the most. I clearly mentioned the purpose of the activity, and I said to them how they should behave between friends, and especially when they are in a classroom with the presence of a lecturer. So they should not be that aggressive, even when they want to win, because I also give them a real life situation. Life does not always take your side.
Okay, for the next question, how important is listening carefully when you are trying to help people solve an argument? Like as you said before, active listening is one of the steps. But how would you do it actually?
Okay, so I think listening is probably the most important communication skill that people always overlook, right? Because many people think they are listening, but actually they are just waiting for their turn to speak. Not all people want to genuinely listen to other people because they have their own stance, and perhaps they have their ego or pride to stand for what they believe in. We dislike it when people interrupt our own speech, or if we are when we are excited to share something, but then suddenly people interrupt us. Of course, we will feel some kind of sadness, emotion, and so on. So, being a lecturer, I feel like that is the most important skill that I have to learn, and in fact, I am still learning at this point. So when I listen to my student, I tend to remind myself I have to be patient, of course, be patient, and I have to wait before I have to say my piece. So first, I have to be patient, and second, I do not interrupt my students when they are talking.
Okay, so next question. When people are angry or upset, words can make things better or worse. So, in your opinion, what kind of language or tone of voice do you find most helpful when trying to calm someone down, especially your students as a lecturer?
All right, so as a lecturer, I think the most important thing is to stay calm and to maintain the respectful tone. So even though the students are younger than me, of course, however, I feel like everybody deserves the same respectful treatment, because if I treat them with respect, then that's how they can treat me with respect. So that's why I think it is very important for me to stay respectful with them. So when you say by choosing the right words, I would say I try to avoid the blaming language. For example, you are wrong, ataupun you did a very huge mistake. I tend to avoid from using those sentences or those phrases because I want to hear from their perspective first. We need to listen from both sides. If a conflict happens, we need to listen to everyone's side, and so that we can know what is the best decision for us to make out of the conflict or out of the misunderstandings that happen. So in my opinion, I would say that avoid blaming is very important, okay, and also the tone itself, because we know communication is not just the way we speak, not just the listening, but also our body language, our facial expressions, and the tone itself. So I try to be as neutral as I can, and also maintain the respectful tone, even though they are my students.
So it's non-verbal gesture like body language tones sometimes play a big role when you try to calm down someone up, because sometimes speaking cannot solve the problem. Sometimes by your gesture they're feeling like they're more open to like share with you like the problem is. So sometimes by making a more respectfully conversation with them can tone down the conversation, can tone down the conflicts. Okay, next. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, a conflict cannot be fully resolved. How should we handle a situation when the other person simply refuse to cooperate?
Okay, so actually, I think one of the hardest lessons that we have to accept is to realize that not every single conflict will end in a happy ending. So sometimes we can only control our own actions, our own feelings and emotions, but we cannot control what other people perceive. Maybe we have done our best trying to communicate, trying to solve the issue.
Okay, for the next question, looking back at your career as an educator and also as a lecturer, is there a specific conflict that you handle that changed or improved your own communication styles?
Okay, so yes, definitely I have that one experience whereby there is one student who frequently skipped my classes. So initially I thought he simply was not interested in my lessons, maybe my activities or the way I teach were quite boring for him. So that was my initial thought.
Okay, for our last question, what is the best advice you can give us as students to help us manage conflict better in our daily life and also for our future career?
Alright, so if there is only one advice that I could give to my student is to communicate early. Do not wait until the issue becomes big and the small problems become a huge conflicts at the end.